Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. Bill, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're going to start with our newly elected board members taking oath. Mayor Dan Devine.
Well, good evening, everybody. I always enjoy doing this. I always enjoy swearing people in and meeting people if they're new. And I always tell people that I'm very appreciative of the district's relationship with the community and the city as a whole. And I look forward to that continuing and continuing to foster that and working together on just continually improving this community. We are, I feel, on a very good path. A lot of things are going in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to continuing that. I also do want to take a minute to thank our 3 departing school board members for their service, Gary, Stephanie, and Christine. I almost said Jane because I saw your name card, sorry, and Christine for their years of service on the school board as well. So, new blood is always good, and yet having a institutional knowledge of a veteran presence is also very good. So I think you've got an excellent balance here. And let's do the oaths. Let's see. Wow, alphabetical order is pretty darn close. But we'll start with Brendan. If you want to come up. I think just right here. Yeah. And then just repeat after me. And raise your hand. I, Brendan Burns,
I, Brendan Burns,
having been elected to the office of West Dallas, West Milwaukee School Board,
having been elected to the office of West Dallas, West Milwaukee School Board,
but have not yet entered upon the duties thereof,
but have not yet entered upon the duties thereof,
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congratulations. Jane, you ready? All right, repeat after me. I, Jane Carr,
I, Jane Carr,
having been elected to the office of West Dallas, West Milwaukee School Board,
having been elected to the office of West Dallas, West Milwaukee School Board,
but have not yet entered upon the duties thereof,
but have not yet entered upon the duties thereof,
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congratulations. Amy? There's a part of me that wants to tell the story of how I met Amy some years ago and how I helped her and Brian get married, but I'll tell that later. Repeat after me. I, Amy Deal,
I, Amy Gill,
having been elected to the office of West Dallas, West Milwaukee School Board,
having been elected to the office of West Dallas, West Milwaukee School Board,
but have not yet entered upon the duties thereof,
but have not yet entered upon the duties thereof,
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office
and will faithfully discharge the duties of said office
to the best of my ability.
to the best of my ability.
Congrats. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Okay, Suzette, if we can do roll call, please.
Yes. Ms. Steele,
Present. Here.
Mr. Sikich,
Present.
Mr. Keller,
Here.
Mrs. Carr,
Here.
Mr. Eustruck,
Here.
Mr. Burns,
Here.
Mr. Lee,
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser,
Here.
Vice President Justin.
Here. Okay, proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Superintendent or any board members, do we have any additions or modifications to the agenda?
I have no changes this evening.
Okay, just a reminder, we will have public comment. If there's anybody in the Zoom chat that would like to, public comment, please put your name in the, group chat and I will let you know. We do have some people in person who will be speaking tonight. Just a reminder, you will have 3 minutes to talk. The board cannot discuss, debate, or act upon any item made during the public comments portion of the board meeting. Follow-up to the public comments will be made by the district staff prior to and/or at the next regular board meeting. Please remember to state your name and address. So first up, we'll have Joe, Mikulacek. I apologize.
It's pronounced Mikulajczyk.
Mikulacek, thank you.
My name is Joe Mikulajczyk. My address is 3355 South Russell Court, New Berlin. I would like to tell you about some of my ideas on the 2021-2022 proposed budget and tax levy. I would also remind you that these views are essentially the strong views of approximately 2,000 voters in the last election. Under no circumstances, under any scenarios, should the budget or tax levy be increased. The enrollment in the school district is declining for a number of reasons, one of which is because this board buckled to the administration and did not have in-classroom instruction for over a year, or nearly a year. Because of this, I believe parents have removed students from the West Dallas schools, and they will not return. With probable lower enrollments, it just makes sense. The budget should be cut. I've also heard ideas from current board members that the taxpayers should pay for daycare for teachers. Children. This is one of the most ridiculous ideas I have heard in a very long time. In general, excuse me, I think the board should examine ways to make some serious cuts to the budget and decrease the tax levy. Declining enrollment should translate to a declining budget and zero consideration for any referendums for any purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, up next, we will have Chuck Koronowski. Just a reminder, you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Charles Kornowski. Everyone calls me Chuck. And I represent, all my children went through the West Dallas School District all the way on. I graduated. I went through the West Dallas School District. It's an awesome school district. I am 100% behind Joel Mikulajczyk and what he just said just now. And I represent we the people of West Dallas, West Milwaukee. I'm on Facebook, and I been involved with the police department for a lot of years with the Black Watch, and I support our police department. I'm also involved with Sheriff Clark on Facebook. And I want to thank all of you that just were elected. And I want to thank you for being our servants. And you will continue to be our servants of we the people protecting our Wisconsin Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you. And up next, we have Robert Terrell.
Good evening, folks. Robert Terrell, 1500 South 92nd Street, Apartment 8, West Dallas. I say no to increased school taxes. In the state of Wisconsin, the cost per student is drastically higher than other government municipalities around the country. Why can't the school systems here in this area and the other schools in Wisconsin get along on the money that they already have? Plus, when you increase taxes, the cost for people to live in any county or city is increased. Taxes then become a stranglehold on us. Do we want to be like the people in the state of California, where at least 83,000 average people are homeless now because they can't afford the property taxes or pay the hiked up rents? Try reading about the homeless that live in San Francisco, for instance, and then think about what you want for this city. Do you want to stumble over the homeless someday in our streets too? Also, why were the school systems of this area paying teachers their salaries for doing little or next to nothing of their jobs for almost the last full year? Perhaps those same school systems should give the taxpayers themselves a rebate for all those teachers' salaries, while the kids in our area were stuck at home. Can't the authorities of this local school system live within a budget, just like the responsible average person or often strapped businesses do? Thank you.
Thank you. With that, no one put anything in the chat, so we will close public comment. Superintendent's report, Dr. Lexman.
Great. Thank you and good evening, everybody, and welcome to our new board members. We'll start with 7.1, so an update on our returning to school plan, and we're going to try to get this up on the screens in the room here,
It'll just take me 1 second.
because now we're kind of in between times between sharing on Zoom and trying to get back into the room. So I'll go ahead and get started verbally, and just, when you get it, you can just kind of catch up with me. So, like each of these, we start with a little bit of an agenda. So again, I'll touch on just the principles that have guided our return to school efforts, for the last 14 months or so. Thank you. I'll touch on where we are with our health metrics and also the internal metrics that we cover, every regular board meeting. We have a reminder from Children's Wisconsin. So the medical advisors there meet with area superintendents, and they're again reminding us of all the mitigation practices, and I think it's a common message of not to let up on those things. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about metric levels that would change or cancel things like prom and graduation. I've talked over the last few meetings that we have plans in place to move forward with prom and graduation, but as metrics change and they've ticked up a little bit, and you'll see that there maybe is a plateau that we're starting to hit. But I just wanted to be upfront about if things really turn for the worse, things like prom, graduation, things that would put at risk keeping kids in school are the kind of things we probably would have to change or cancel. And I'll briefly touch on some of the news that's around in the state around dollars for COVID testing in the fall, and then where we are a little bit with next steps. Again, the guiding principles that we have been following is safety and well-being has been the driver. Learning that works for all, and we're in the midst of balancing in-person learning with virtual for some families. Being responsive and flexible, and then practicality of implementation. So what's been practical for us to actually produce. So in terms of the metrics, I just received the metrics through April 20th at 5 o'clock today from the health department. So I managed to get these in. And you'll see that we're starting to plateau, and some of the numbers have come down a little bit. So for Milwaukee County, the burden rate still went up quite a bit, but we're still in the high category. We haven't shifted to moderately, to the red color just yet. So for West Dallas, West Milwaukee, the burden rate came down just a tick. And then the positivity rate both came down, and for West Dallas, West Milwaukee came down quite a bit over that 7 days. And so Bob Leisha, our commissioner for the health department, also noted that testing has declined. And so that may, I think his note, contribute to a little bit of that 8.2 to 5.9. But he did note that it does appear that there's a bit of a plateau. The other thing I wanted to jump, oh, I can't do that in here. Can you click on the active link, Deidre? Sorry. Thought I was in Zoom again sharing. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the document, it's the CDC metrics that we've included here when they came out with their latest guidance on returning kids to schools, right there, just in that one. And you'll see that these numbers too, we're still in the kind of high transmission, so we're still in the red, but or with the burden rate, sorry, and then in the positivity rate, we're in low, which is interesting. And if we were actually following the CDC guidance right now, we would probably be in hybrid learning. We'd probably be going back a step to the 2-day a week, half the kids in school, so we can do a better job of socially distancing on buses and in classrooms. I'm not recommending that. I just wanted to draw the board's attention and the public's attention to the dynamics in this. And I think it's why the messages about we have to continue with the mitigation practices in order to keep our kids in school. And we seem to be doing pretty well in terms of our internal numbers. So if you can go back over to the presentation, please, and go to the next slide. So our latest internal numbers tend to be fairly steady, right? So that we jumped up a little bit. I don't think that's a surprise as we came back to school, but they seem to be remaining pretty steady. So if you go to the next one, which is our internal active quarantine and monitoring, what is encouraging here is the positive or active cases, which is, that's consistent with the previous slide. Those are stable and remain pretty low. What is not a surprise is that we're having more kids have to quarantine, right? There's just more kids in school, so there's more opportunity to be exposed to somebody that is positive or potentially positive. And so we're seeing many more students having to quarantine for the 10 days. And so we've had a rather large group at Horace Mann last week and at Lane. This is the message from the medical community, and what I did is it's in a statement that's up on their website. It was in a press release last week, and I think it's worth kind of emphasizing so that you'll see in blue what I've highlighted here, that they're extremely optimistic about the data we're seeing about its effectiveness in younger kids, meaning the vaccines, so there's some encouraging news there. And right now, we're working with the health department to gather information from 16, 17, and 8-year-olds. They may potentially want to do a focus group with students and parents just to talk about, what is it that is either contributing to your interest in getting vaccinated or not. I think is what they're trying to understand in terms of what are the key messages to help get the word out. And then they strongly encourage everyone to continue to wear a mask, continue to practice social distancing when possible, and as always, continue to wash your hands. I have had 2 parents in the last week reach out asking when it's going to be okay for kids not to have to wear masks when they're outside. And the answer to that at this point is that I'd have to go back to the board. It would take board action to change that because the mask requirement that you supported was on buses, in buildings, on school grounds. And so we've been consistent with that. And every time I'm out at especially elementary school when kids are outside, they're wearing their masks. So it's pretty encouraging. But I get that now that more and more people are vaccinated, that question will come. And there was some news coverage even this evening that the president may be talking about for fully vaccinated people not needing to wear their masks outside. So we're watching, if there's going to be a change in CDC guidance, and I may come back in, a couple of weeks from now, asking you to think about that to align it more to the guidance. But at this point, we're staying the course. And then this one is really what I dropped here is what may contribute if we have to change or cancel events. So if we hit a very high burden rate in Milwaukee County and West Allis, West Milwaukee, so it's the kind of, not the bright red, but the one right above high, which is where we are right now. But we're right at the top, the lower end of the high category, so we might drop into moderately high if the plateau turns into some decline. But if we go the other direction, would be quite a bit of movement to hit very high. But that's where I would start making moves to change or cancel events like prom and graduation. And it would have to be, I think it makes sense that it would also be above 5% positivity rate, which is where we are right now. But again, that has come down quite a bit for West Allis, West Milwaukee. So that's at least my thinking related to if things get worse, what we may need to do. And again, I just want to be kind of open and honest about it so that there aren't surprises should we need to make some hard decisions. And then COVID testing, there's been quite a bit of news around our governor proposing $175 million to support testing. And so there's not really formal guidance or recommendations that exist at this time. Caitlin and I did a webinar on Friday with the Department of Health Services, and it was really more about how to administer kind of tests in schools at scale and actually train kids to do some of their own use of the kits to get results. And so we learned a bunch about that. At this point, one of the big messages, and this is Caitlin's kind of bullet, the third bullet, is it's really all about logistics, about how we're going to try to pull this off in the fall. But it is becoming, I think, more and more standard practice. And we've requested to be part of the DHS COVID testing pilot project. And so we've got our kind of name in the forefront. So if they want to work with us to try to pilot some of this, we've already sent our information through the health department to the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. And then in terms of next steps, we're going to continue our end of year event planning. And so prom is going to be in small cohorts. Kids will dance with their small cohort. They'll stay at their tables. Both high schools are planning this together, which is kind of cool to see our high school students across the two comprehensive actually planning. And even though the proms aren't together, they're one Saturday apart, but they're all going to be at the Central Fieldhouse, or the Steck Fieldhouse, because it's the largest indoor space we have. And we're really turning it over and empowering our young people, our seniors in particular, to plan this event and then to have it in a way that's safe and doesn't, again, jeopardize kids being able to go to school. Deidre and the team continue summer school planning, and again, it's going to be extended and a little more robust, especially for younger kids. Then we're monitoring, again, this is a bullet every time now. State guidances are going to be, early start to the new school year, and there's some legislation being proposed that maybe changes the start date, that you can't start before Labor Day. And then, like I said, we're going to continue to work with our health department, like I said, around this idea of the focus groups around teenage or student vaccinations. And then also, we'll get some feedback on what I just shared about what are the triggers that might cause us to take a step back from things like prom and graduation. So that's the end of this part of the superintendent's report. So any board members have questions about this?
Kristen?
Just a quick question. I know you met with a bunch of high school students who advocated amazingly on behalf of the prom. Have you shared with them the concerns of the COVID infection rate increasing?
We have. We've talked about it, and it's a little bit why we're going down the road of testing in order to come to prom. But the logistics of that were just so daunting to try to figure out that we decided, and it was in conversations with other area superintendents, they also went down the path of we should test before prom. And it just, the logistics of it just were not going to work out. Everybody was kind of watching what Elmbrook is doing, and they're continuing with their plan. But in the end, we thought keeping kids in cohorts, trying to limit if there's going to be exposure to very small groups so that we don't put, essentially school at risk. But we've been really honest with the young people that an exposure, if they're not really following kind of their plan, could shut down the entire senior class, right? And that's possible, and this is towards the end of a school year. And so we're hoping that they're really committed to their plan and keep moving forward with it. Okay.
Noah? Hold on, Noah.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to make a note regarding the numbers. So it's expected that we're going to see more students having it and less adults having it, because most adults, especially who are teachers and in staff in schools, have had the opportunity to get vaccinated if they want to. And so the circulation among staff should be a lot less because of that. But we are going to see that in students, because besides 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds at the high school level, they don't have the opportunity to be vaccinated yet. So really it's going to be about those mitigation practices, especially in elementary and middle schools, intermediate schools, because that's going to prevent those outbreaks from happening, so we don't have them. We haven't shut the school down yet, luckily. But looking at that burden rate, that's why it's so important, because that it's circulating in the community is gonna get brought into the schools, and then it'll circulate in our kids. And so, I'm not surprised with the numbers that we're looking at right now by that. And, hopefully that with those numbers coming back down in our community, that will relieve the burden that we have in the schools.
So, good, yep, thank you.
Anybody else? No? Okay.
Okay, 7.2 is the legislative update. So locally, School District of West Allis, West Milwaukee et al. So on Monday, April 12th of this year, the Board of Canvassers certified the following citizens were elected to the Board of Education for our school district. And again, you're all sworn in tonight, so it's all official. Jane Carr, Amy Deal, and Brendan Burns, so congratulations and welcome. As new board members, you kind of get thrown into the middle of a stream that's rapidly moving, so there's no other way to do it. But ask questions, learn. We're here to support you as much as you want to support the rest of the board. We look forward to working with all of you. And then at the state level, like I mentioned in the presentation, so the Senate Education Committee held hearings on start date, equalization aid bills, and others that are tied to education. So the commitments of fall classes in public schools, that's SB 182, that's one we're going to watch pretty closely, and hopefully some relief on when schools can or cannot start the school year. There's a number of, the timing of equalization aid payments are trying to spread them out a little more evenly during the year. That really helps Caitlin. It doesn't change any of the dollars that come in. It just changes when they come in, which is then better or easier to manage. There's a Senate bill on transportation to private schools. There's one on measuring school districts' improvement for the school and school district accountability report, so that's another one we're watching. We did, there's another waiver again this year on the accountability report side. It's not a waiver from testing, so we're still required to do the testing, but this year there is a waiver on the accountability side. This is legislation that may change the way we think about school and district accountability. And then a couple that are related to open enrollment, posting the child abuse and neglect reporting hotline in school buildings, which we do, but this would require it, I think, more broadly. And then, again, some legislation related to parental choice programs and special needs scholarship programs and independent charter schools. So those are all things we'll be watching as they move through the legislative process. And then 7.3 are recognitions for this meeting. There's quite a few. Again, we want to recognize and thank Stephanie Emmons, 6 years of service, Gary Schultz, 3 years, and Christine Klug, 3 years to our school board. We're forever grateful for their leadership and their dedication to education, and we look forward to seeing them supporting the work as we continue to move forward. Central High School, they'd like to recognize Janelle Tyler Schrader, Carl Rutzen, Craig Mattern, and Ryan Hammernick, and Dave Stanley, providing us with substitute teacher support during the week of March 22nd, 2021. And so there's some names there that we don't usually think of as substitute teachers, but folks in this building often have to roll out into schools, and Deidre has taught elementary school a couple times now, and Ryan Hammernick is teaching. And it's a way for us to, it's a B team and a C team to try to, keep schools operating and classes covered. At Dot Project-Based High School, congratulations to science teacher Michelle Burton and her Travel Passport Seminar students for writing and receiving a $500 grant from the National Park Trust. The funds will be used to help students to construct portable stream table boxes to learn more about the effects of weathering and erosion. DOCI students also plan to share this project with the intermediate school students in our district. From high school athletics, we'd like to recognize the great work of our cheer teams. Each of these student athletes does an amazing job in support of football, girls basketball, boys basketball throughout the fall and winter, and this year, an alternate spring season. Our cheer teams are deeply appreciated by our players and our fans. At Lane Intermediate School, we'd like to recognize our health room monitors, Jacqueline Smith and Chikaria Thompson. They are on the front line when it comes to checking that our students are not ill when at school and contacting parents when they are. When they are not busy monitoring students, they will willingly assist with other tasks. They are a welcomed addition to our staff. From the Leadership and Learning Department, this month, our Director of Leadership and Learning, Deidre Raymer, was invited to be part of a panel discussion designed to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the movie Most Likely to Succeed. She was on the panel with the producer, director, writer, and stars of the movie to discuss how the film impacted thinking around what is possible for students and influence practice in schools around the nation. From Recreation and Community Services, congratulations to Program Manager Sam Sujecki. He was awarded a grant from Whitetails Unlimited on behalf of former employees Pat and Belinda Kirschbaum. The grant funds will be used to purchase bows, arrows, and arm guards for our department's youth archery program. And then at Shared Journeys, congratulations to Danny Hebben for receiving her child care certification. Special thanks to our team for making weekly front porch deliveries of food, diapers, and other items to our students and their children. And special thanks to our staff and students for increased participation in our monthly family nights. And then at Walker Elementary School, we'd like to recognize Walker's head secretary, Gina Kirkpatrick, for all of her hard work and dedication. Gina greets everyone with a smile and is always willing to assist with whatever is needed. She's a vital part of our school's success, and we appreciate her. And at West Milwaukee Intermediate, we'd like to recognize 6th grade math teacher Brad Bologna for motivating his students to work hard and persevere. Over the past year, 29 of his students have advanced into the 7th grade curriculum, and that's during a year when most of the year was virtual, which is pretty cool. So appreciation for all of the hard work that people continue to contribute to our school district. And then just a couple updates from me. So the work of the school district, even though it's odd times, some of it continues to move forward, and tonight you're surrounded by the ELA adoption, and this is really Deidre and her team. And I would just wanted to express appreciation for all the teachers that are putting time in to evaluate materials and find kind of what is the next set of resources that we'll use to help improve English language arts. But it's a normal part of the process of going through, resource adoption cycles, and so that work is ongoing. The facility planning continues, so the FACT, so that's the big community team, that actually meets tomorrow. We're in the phase of the process where there's both anxiety and then some kind of hopefulness starts to emerge. And the anxiety part of it is because we're talking about actual buildings that are likely to be idled or reduced. And we went in with the big message is we're running physical space for 12,000 students, but we have 7,500. Right? So it's obvious that that message means some schools will not continue to operate as schools. And we're in the phase where those conversations are not just hypothetical anymore, they're actual school buildings that we're talking about. And that makes people nervous. And as we take a couple more steps in the process, then I think as the schools that it looks like the buildings will be idled, we'll start to do some staff meetings. And it's really important that they hear kind of directly from me and the team as we work through this process. But one of the key messages, we're still going to have the same number of students, so we're going to need the same number of teachers. It's really the other overhead that comes with running a building, which is an administrator or principal, an assistant principal, a deeper learning coach, a secretary, a custodian. Those are the positions that end up reduced, and that's where you start to get some of the savings that comes from consolidating buildings. And then the hopeful side is we start to review drawings, right? So we're working with an architectural firm and a construction firm, and the architects start to have some visions of working with us and talking with us and learning about the kind of education we're trying to provide. And it is kind of interesting when they start to rethink what a building can do for us. And that gets to be the exciting side. So tomorrow, FACT is meeting. We're going through the big high school questions. Then we're going to do a special our first face-to-face meeting will be on Saturday, May 8th. And we're actually starting at Central to do a tour at Central and talk through some of the big kind of CIP projects that are there if we're going to have to bring that back up to standard. And then we're going to spend some time at Hale and get a sense of that building physically and what's possible there. And then the architects are going to share with us some floor plans, and very early, they're not fancy drawings yet, but you get a feel for what can be created. So the hope of what's possible starts to come through the process. And then the Teacher Compensation Committee continues its work, so that's thanks to Jeff Thompson and the HR team, and that's really starting to come together. There's a pretty solid framework now, and we're pretty close on agreeing about what this really new system should look like. And so there's a few more meetings that'll take place, and then it's going to come to the board. So it'll come through committee, and it'll end up coming to the board. So hopefully that we get support for it at this level, and we can put all the pieces in place to implement it next school year. And so that concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Lexman. All right, so we're gonna review the board calendar. So upcoming May 10th, we will have a regular board meeting at 6 PM, followed by a closed session meeting. Monday, May 17th at 6 PM, workshop on financial stability and May 24th at 6 PM, regular board meeting. Tuesday, June 1st, 2021 will be our employee recognition event. Our committee reports, let's see, we have up first college and career readiness. Bill Ustruck.
Yes, our committee discussed policy 2414, human growth and development. Richard advised us that we need to leave the policy intact as written. Deidre reviewed it with our attorneys as we were reading the statute differently. Our lawyers advised to leave the policy as is. We will include the financial benefits of marriage into the coursework. Then Christine made a motion to accept the first reading, and Kristen seconded the motion. So passed unanimously. We also update on some curricular adoptions. We discussed the update on the following curricular adoptions. ELA. The teacher team is currently piloting materials from McGraw-Hill and Scholastic. They had an updated Q&A from Scholastic on April 21st and have a Q&A with McGraw-Hill on April 28th. These teachers are very excited to try out the materials. All board members are welcome to check out the samples as you see around here. Science, our 6 to 12 science team is leaning towards writing their own curriculum and investing in updating lab equipment instead of core resource. They are looking at some platforms that will manage this as we want to ensure we are meeting the guaranteed and viable curriculum. And social studies, our 6 through 12 social studies team is looking at different resources for 6 through 8 and 9 through 12. The 6 through 8 team is looking at text, and the 9 through 12 teams are investigating some online platforms as well as researching text. Our next steps, the first read is complete. At our May meeting, we'll be hearing a proposal to introduce an elective African American Studies course and getting an update on our co-curricular plan.
Thank you, Bill. Any questions, anyone? Okay, 8.2, financial stability and efficacy. Lee? Noah?
Yep, thank you very much. We met this last Monday, and what we did is we referred the policies of 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 to the full board for consideration. That was passed unanimously forward after we had reviewed those over the last several weeks. And then we also discussed the 21-22 school budget, which we're going to have a workshop on later here tonight. But talked about some options, talked about where we're at with that budget and some still unknowns that we have to work through to figure out where we're going to end up for the official budget later in October. So that's all that we discussed.
Okay. 8.3, do any board members have any community events coming up they'd like to talk about or anything they've attended? Noah?
I do. I had the pleasure of visiting Dotke Heights School recently and was able to see their new beehive that they have in place there, which is great. They recently were able to harvest 50 pounds of honey from the beehive, and it's very early on, so they're doing really great with that. And then I also was given a tour by a few students of their new aquaponics lab, and they were able to walk me through they have different size tanks there, different fish that are going to be used to help and fertilize the plants that they're going to grow there. And they also went to West Milwaukee to start up a mini little aquaponics lab there as well. So it was a really great tour. I had an awesome time, and I recommend anyone to go and take a look from the board for themselves and spend some time with Mr. Gels over there. So I learned a lot.
Thank you, Noah. Anybody else have anything to share? If not, we will move on to the consent agenda. Does anybody need anything separated out? If not, we will have 9.1, approval of minutes, 9.2, employment summary, 9.3, supplementary contracts, 9.4, financial summary.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Everybody in favor say yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes?
Aye.
Aye, sorry. It says yes on the paper, I read it. How about aye? Anybody opposed?
Threw us off.
Okay, the motion has passed. And our action items for this evening, 10.1, international field trip to Paris, summer of 2022.
I'll turn this over to Deidre.
Hi,
So in our hybrid model here, I also have our teacher, Jean, who's going to be sharing with us from Zoom. I think if Brandon said this is going to work correctly, about the details of the trip. But it's an exciting opportunity for us as a school district to be getting back into the swing of what are some more typical activities for us, which are having the opportunity to allow our students the chance to travel internationally. And Jean had some great ideas for making sure that we are all inclusive in the trip, and has done this in a few school districts that she has worked in before. So Jean, we'll pass it over to you to share some more details.
Excited to be at West Allis Central High School and to be in the school district. And as Dee Dee said, I've traveled before with students, and the kids here are just wonderful. And I think this would be so neat to bring this opportunity to take the language and the culture and make it real for them, so that when they get off the plane and there's the real Eiffel Tower and there's the Arc de Triomphe and all these other landmarks in Paris, and then going down, we'll be traveling to Provence, which is down in Avignon where Paul Cézanne, an artist, was working. We'll be traveling down to the Riviera and seeing what's going on down there in Monaco. There is a trip on to Milan after the French Riviera, so that it's an opportunity for the language and the culture to really come alive. And there's a lot of fundraising that we can do with EF Tours, who has been doing this for many, many years. The principal, Jeff Taylor, was familiar with EF Tours, and they have a tour agent with us 24/7. So if there's anything that should come up, they also have, this would be for summer of 2022. So by then, hopefully COVID will be under wraps, further along than we are now, although they are starting to open up this summer. They're trying to open up a lot of European countries. But it's a chance to travel and live what we're learning in the classroom, from the languages to the world histories to everything like that. And we're opening it up to both the high schools, not just to West Allis Central, but to Hale too. And it's a chance to also to do fundraising, and EF Tours has a fundraising page for the kids. In the past, I've done a Donors Choose, where I've gotten a grant to help pay for the kids. We've done things with restaurants where they'll give part of their sales to us, and there's all sorts of things that we can do for fundraising as well. And this is a long enough time out there so that people have time to start saving and making payments over time for the trip. So we're just really hopeful that the board will see the value and appreciate the opportunity that we have to work with the kids in this adventure and this once-in-a-lifetime experience. It's something for the kids to experience firsthand. Europe, it's just amazing what it does for them, and opening up their eyes and their spirit and their mind. It's just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Noah?
You mentioned that you were opening up for Hale and Central. Would it also be available for any DOCU students if they were interested in participating?
Yes.
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 Okay. Great.
Any
Yes,
other-
sorry, I didn't mean to not. Yes, absolutely.
Very good.
Any other questions? If not, I look for a motion.
Move to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. 10.2, authority for administrators to issue final non-renewal notice to teachers. Mr. Thompson.
Good evening, everybody. I am here tonight asking the board to approve authorizing administration to issue final non-renew notices to teachers as deemed necessary. This is the next step in our process, just following state statutes, and so just asking for approval.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Thompson?
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? If not, motion passes. Okay, 10.3, we will be seek a position on CISA 1 Board of Controls. This is a 3-year term. Dr. Lexman.
Yeah, thank you. So this is an annual consideration for the board. And so we have a delegate to CISA, but there's also an opportunity for potentially for our person that the board sends to CISA to become a member of the Board of Control. And this is just really, it's really you're giving yourselves permission to pursue a seat on the Board of Control through action on this item today. And we recommend it. We always think it's good for us to have our name and our work, be more present regionally. But there is a selection process, so this is just the first step, and then it goes into the hands of CISA to determine who sits on the Board of Control. But in the past, this board has supported pursuing that, and so we're recommending that that be the same again.
Any questions, Noah?
Just a little background, because I'm the current CISA rep. We did go up for this last year. I had my name in there. I was not elected. I think I was too new because that was the first time I was ever there. But so they, I was considered though. There wasn't like tons of competition, but there are some people who, districts who routinely are on the Board of Control, and there's only certain seats that are open every year. So there's regional sections that have seats, and there's like open seats basically where they'll fill in. So I was up for an open seat. Our region didn't have any open seats at that time that I was there. So just a little background for the board.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have any questions? If not, I'll look for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? If not, motion carries. Okay, 10.4, approval of our Neola policies as a first reading, 2,000s, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. Dr. Lexman.
Okay, thank you. So this is the final steps of what's been an enormous project, more so for Beth and Deidre and Suzette and all of you on the board over the last, 24 plus months that we've been working through this. And just so for our new board members, and again, the public that maybe is listening or understanding this work for the very first time, Neola is a very common policy platform that gets used by many districts in the state of Wisconsin. They're also in Michigan. And it starts with kind of a very kind of base set of template policies that every school board should have, either by state statute or by just good practice. And then it's a process of going through every single one of the kind of base or template policies and looking at what lines up to our current policy, and are there things in our current policy that we want to customize into the base policy from Neola. So that work has been done by our teams, by board committees to customize them. And where we are in the process is we've already approved the bylaws and the 1000s, and inside of that is a policy about approving policy. And so that, and the process by which the board now approves policy differs a little bit from the previous policy, right? So when Heather and Noah and I met last week, we talked through this. We thought it just makes sense. Let's just shift over to the new policy entirely. The other option would be ask the board to waive the new policy. But we think it makes more sense given that there's 3 new board members, then there's another 30-day period. So if the 3 of you have questions and want to reach out to us or want to reach out to other members of the board that, at the committee level worked on these policies, that's an opportunity for you to do that. But we are looking forward to the culmination of this entire project. And so with approval tonight, it is simply approving the first reading, and then they're held at the board level now for 30 days. So going forward with new policy or revision to policy, it'll still come through committee. It'll get referred to the board for a first reading. So it's very similar to, not very similar, exactly the same as what we're doing now. And in the past, it was held at committee for the 30 days. And under the new policy, it gets held at the board level for 30 days. And that really is to allow board members questions, and also for the public to have an opportunity, because policy is one of the main things the school board uses to guide the work of the organization. And so this is, we're recommending approval for first reading. That'll be held for 30 days, and we'll come back in May and finalize the whole Neola policy project.
Anyone have any questions? If not, I'll be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. And we'll move on to our workshop tonight. Caitlin, financial stability and efficacy.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our 3 new board members. We look forward to working with you over the next few years here. So tonight we are on our second preliminary budget workshop. We had our first one in the beginning of March. And at that time, we talked a lot more in depth through the revenue limit process, how that works, the formula, and our staffing projections. So we won't go through that as in depth, but meeting is recorded and is available online for anybody who is interested in reviewing that. So we will move into our workshop for tonight. So our state budget timeline is, we have talked through this in the past, and it is an important step in every other year's budget. So the state works on a 2-year budget cycle. We call it a biennial budget. So the state is working on their 21-23 budget. For us, that means we are moving into our 21-22 budget, which is the first year in the state's biennial budget, which is always leaves us with fewer known factors at this point in the budget process. Some of those factors, as we'll talk through in a few minutes, are the per pupil increase within the revenue limit, a per pupil categorical increase, and a special ed reimbursement increase, or the special ed reimbursement rate. We can't guarantee an increase. But those are some of the factors that do play into our budget that we do not know at this time. So we have assumptions built into our budget. Right now we have a $50 revenue limit per pupil increase factored into our budget, and we have the special ed rate staying the same, our reimbursement rate, as an assumption currently built into our 21-22 budget. And what is noteworthy is that a preliminary budget is in flux at this point in the budget cycle. So our budget cycle starts in the spring and goes all the way through the end of October, and so we work on assumptions, and as we go through the months, we narrow in on our true revenues and our true expenses. So at this point, a lot of the information built into our budget is in flux and is an assumption at this point. So we'll work through some of the expense assumptions that are built into our budget, and the first one is one of those hefty assumptions that could change and swing our budget in one way or another. So right now we have a health insurance increase of 8.5% built into our budget. And that is because we have a cap with WEA for the next 2 years, where that would be the maximum increase we would see in health insurance. So that 8.5% actually equates to $1 million over the course of a calendar year. Our increase is in January for our health insurance, so in the course of a fiscal year, we only see half of that. So about $500,000 is what we are projecting as an additional cost in our health insurance for next year. If that does come in lower, then we would see a savings there. We have a 1.5% dental insurance increase assumed in our budget at this point. We have an increase in WRS. So for WRS, the employer and the employee both share into the cost. So our district portion, we are assuming that we move from a 6.75 to a 6.85% deduction there, or a benefit on behalf of our school district. We have a 4% transportation cost increase, and that one is a known factor at this point. So that was part of our negotiations with the students that we worked through in the summer. So that 4% is a known factor. We have a new expense this year, our crossing guards. So previously, the city had the crossing guard expense on their books, and starting 21-22 is the first year that our school district will take on that crossing guard expense. So within our budget, that's about $180,000 for next year. We also have built into our budget a CPI increase. So we do know that rate is 1.23% that is established for next year. In addition, we have a $1 million additional dollars earmarked for compensation model. So as Dr. Lexman has mentioned tonight, we're working through our draft compensation model at this point, and the goal is to increase teacher compensation to a more comparable measure in the area, and the only way to do that is to add additional dollars towards our compensation model. So at this point in time, we have $1 million additional dollars for teacher compensation. We have an increase in net open enrollment expense. So what this is every time a student open enrolls out, we have to pay the district to which that student open enrolls into. And when a student open enrolls into our district, we receive money from that district where the student is coming from, that resident district. When we have the same amount of students going out and going in, there's a net zero cost. But when we have additional students going out, more students going out than we have coming in, that creates a cost for us. So that cost we are projecting in our budget to increase on trend with how it's increased in the last few years. And so thus that increase in net open enrollment expense is built into our budget for next year. In addition, at this point in time, we also have our school budgets funded at 75% of the building budget allocation formula. So that's an internal formula that was created years ago, and it's based on our the amount of the enrollment at each school, as well as a factor of free and reduced percentage within the school. So that school budget total is basically multiplied by 0.75 at this point in our budget, and that is about, sort of equates to about $375,000 worth of savings, or a smaller expense within our budget when we do that 75% allocation. Jeff, go ahead.
Do you want them now or at the
Sure,
end?
now's fine.
The WRS, is that in effect, or are you assuming you have been notified that it's going to go up? Or?
No, that's a good question. So we do not, that one is not a known factor at this point. It's just an assumption to be conservative within our budget. So
Okay.
we do not know that WRS is increasing. It has generally increased over the years. I think going into this fiscal year was the first year it didn't increase in a number of years. So we assume that it may increase next year.
Thank you.
If it doesn't, then we would see a savings there.
Thank you.
So looking at our current projected budget, and again, I'm not going into detail on the revenue limit as we did that on the March 8th meeting, but our main projection here is based on a decrease that we are seeing within our revenue limit. So the revenue limit is that formula from the state that we do not control the dollars that we get through that revenue limit. And essentially a high-level version of it is that we take our resident membership times the per pupil dollar amount that we are seeing within that formula, which is given to us by the state, plus exemptions that we do not control, and that equals that total revenue limit. So right now we're seeing essentially this entire deficit that we were projecting at this point in time for next year is due to the revenue limit, the total amount of money that we receive from property taxes and state aid decreasing. So there are a number of factors that we worked through since the last time we talked through this. When we met in March, that number was about $3.1 million. So we've done a lot of work in narrowing in on our true expenses since March, and some of them include the following. So we have spent a lot of time on our special education funding puzzle. This is one of the most complex parts of our budget. So there's a standard called maintenance of effort within Fund 27, which essentially means, I'm boiling it down to a super high level, is that we have to spend the same dollars or more each year in our Fund 27, our special education local costs, unless you have a reason to decrease, such as fewer special ed students. So like many other districts in the state of Wisconsin, due to COVID, we saw a decrease in our special education students that are enrolled in our school district, which essentially means that we can decrease the amount of dollars that we spend locally in Fund 27 and instead put those dollars on our grants, either a flow-through grant or a preschool grant or our ESSER grant. And in doing so, essentially, it reduces our transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27. So we see a savings there when we do that. And this also helps us next year because of the way that maintenance of effort works. We have to maintain those costs. When we drop those expenses that are in our local costs, we've lowered our maintenance of effort threshold or standard so that next year we can spend fewer dollars there and keep those dollars on the grant instead of our local costs. So we call it a puzzle because it really is finding the best way, the most efficient way to spend our dollars within the few special ed buckets of funding that we receive. In addition, we have worked through department priority budgeting. So another word that often is used for this type of budgeting is zero-based budgeting. And we did this with our budgets that are not entirely contractual in nature. So the big ones are technology, leadership and learning, business services, human resources, and communications. And essentially what we do is, instead of saying, here's your dollar amount in your department budget, we say, in your projections, list out every single expense that you will have for next year and put them in a few buckets. The first one is contractually obligated. What have we already signed a contract to do? The second bucket is necessary to function. And then the third bucket is additional costs. And the goal is to be able to fund all of them. But when we get down to it, having those few buckets and those priorities really helps us understand where our needs are when it really comes down to if we have to balance our budget and there's no other option, that's where we could turn. And so we did that department budgeting, which again, these are the things that brought us from that $3 million deficit we saw a month ago to this 1.4 that we're seeing at this point. We also have our leadership and learning department working their heads off to get our curriculum adoptions through this year. So there, as you can see, lots of fun, exciting things going on in terms of our curriculum adoptions in various subject areas. And having those in our budget this year means that we don't have to put them in future years' budgets. And those are costly, oftentimes upwards of $100,000, sometimes $200,000-$300,000 for those big ones, English, ELA, and math. So being able to get those in this year's budget is really crucial. And we'll talk through in May that budget reallocation and how we are able to fund those this year and not have to put them in future budgets. And then also we've talked through the school budgets at 75% of their per pupil allocation within our own formula. And those are going out this week. And when we send those budget worksheets out, we're also sending out a survey that will gather feedback from the schools, from the school leaders on what does that mean? What is the impact on their school when they're receiving that 75% instead of the 100% allocation? Are they feeling it in the classrooms? Is it fewer supplies? Is it fewer professional development opportunities? What is the impact when we go from that 100% to the 75%? And really understanding how that's affecting schools, and then taking that feedback back and sharing it with our board finance committee, sharing it with the board, and understanding how else can we make sure that our students are getting the opportunities that they need. Is it within our grants, using our grants differently? Is it within one of our department budgets? And so we're looking forward to receiving that feedback from schools once we send those department budgets and surveys out this week. So there are a number of factors that would change our position. And as we talked about, we're only in April and we go through October. So these factors will, they are likely to change. So our current budget, as I've heard other business managers say, is wrong at this point because we do not know all the facts. So the state budget factors that would change our current budget status for next year is a per pupil increase within the revenue limit. So we currently have assumed a $50 increase. The governor has proposed a $200 increase. I do not believe, based on what we're hearing from the state legislators, that the governor's budget will pass as is. It's very likely that the legislators will kind of scrap it and start over. But if we saw an increase to, say, $150 per pupil instead of that $50 that we're assuming right now, we would see an increase in revenue. We also have our per pupil categorical aid dollar amount. So that's outside of the revenue limit. Essentially, that's a simple math formula, which is our enrollment times our dollar amount, whatever it is that we get per student in categorical aid, equals the dollar amount that we get in the per pupil categorical aid as a whole. And so we have assumed the same dollar amount that we had in our budget that was approved last year. If that increases, we would see additional dollars in revenue. We also currently have our special ed reimbursement rate percentage the same as this year. The governor has, which is 28%. This year, 28.18%. It does change each year. It's been around 26. The governor has proposed 45% reimbursement in special ed costs, which would be a game changer in our budget, and it would provide us with upwards of probably $2 million in additional revenue because of right now we have in our special ed local funding, I would say about $12 million in expenses. So if that reimbursement rate goes from 28 to 45, that essentially reduces the amount that we have to transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27 at the end of the year, freeing up those dollars within our budget for our other needs and priorities. And also, as we talked about earlier, that health insurance reimbursement renewal, or the health insurance renewal rate. So we have projected an 8.5% increase, which is our cap for next year. Last year, we had at this point in time 20% renewal budgeted, and actually only came in with about, I believe it was a 1.3 or 1.5% once everything was all said and done and negotiated, which was incredible. WEA absolutely told us that they did not want to lose us as a client last year because our loss ratios did not support a 1.5% increase, and we were able to Hayes on behalf of our school district was able to negotiate that down to that really low increase. And as we talked about, going from up to an 8.5% increase is a $500,000 expense for next year, really $1 million over the calendar year. So if we see a decrease in that, that would definitely free up dollars as well. And finally, replacing staff assumptions with actual. So at this point in time, if a staff member would say retire, who's at the higher end of our pay scale, and a newer staff member comes in who has fewer years of experience, that oftentimes just equates to simply a lower salary and benefits package for that person. So there are a number of other moving parts that kind of all will work together in balancing our budget. And so we're simultaneously working through these components. We currently are working through a budget reallocation for our current year. And we'll talk through this at our May, I believe it's 11th, or maybe it's May 17th, whatever our second board meeting and meeting is in May. And we'll have both in the FSE committee meeting and as well as our full board meeting, we'll talk through the plan for our budget reallocation, and then the following meeting the board will approve it or recommend any proposed changes to it. So there are a few reasons why we've been able to have this budget reallocation opportunity. One of the first is our increasingly accurate staffing tracking. So we have a system now which is basically interdepartmental, where departments are working together, where if a staff member leaves after we've budgeted for them, and they come in with, say they take a single family plan and we've budgeted for a family health insurance plan, that staff member right there would just save at least $10,000. We have to budget conservatively and assume that when a staff member comes in that they're going to take a family plan, that family plan is about $23,000. So if a staff member, if we have that budgeted as a family plan and a staff member comes in and has a single plan or actually doesn't take insurance at all, we see a savings there. And so being able to track this in real time has opened up an incredible opportunity for us in being able to actually see where we are throughout the year and not just at the end of the year in terms of our salary and benefits budgeting to actual. Another important piece of this budget reallocation, and again, we'll go much more into depth in May, but we have an AGR staff class reclassification, and AGR is our grant, the Achievement Gap Reduction, that we've talked through previously with our board, where staff members are able to, basically any staff members that we have coded or have their salary and benefits package is within our regular general operating budget, within our Fund 10 budget. Any staff members that are in there that we're able to adjust onto the AGR grant for this year, when we do that, that essentially frees up those dollars within Fund 10. And we'll talk through that again more in depth within May. And then finally, transportation. So if you recall, when we were budgeting in October when we approved our final budget, and previously through September, we had thought that we could come back to school in October or November. And so when we were negotiating our transportation contract with First Student throughout the summer, which took months, but certainly was well worth it, and our students are benefiting from it now, as we only had a few minor road bumps with transportation when we came back to school. That transportation agreement was that we would pay per student 50% of all non-service days, so basically days where all students were virtual, for those days, and then 100% obviously when students are back to school. And the reason for that negotiation was that when it comes time for us to come back to school, that first student would have the drivers and the team necessary to hop on board and start our routes, which they did. So that was certainly benefited us. And then when we didn't go back to school as soon as, I should say in person, obviously students were learning the entire time virtually, that saved dollars because we were only paying 50% for each of those months instead of 100% of our transportation contract. And another moving part, one of the third of the big ones, is our ESSER funding. So this is our COVID relief funding, and at this point in time, we are outlining our needs. We are receiving school feedback, so it'll be part of their school visioning meetings on where they could benefit, where their students could benefit from funding, this additional funding, to make sure students are on track. And then there's also, as we've talked about many times tonight, lots of unknowns. Will we have COVID testing in schools? We now know that there's additional money in the state for COVID testing. We do not know the implementation of that, the rollout, how those dollars will be implemented, but we do see COVID testing as a potential for next year, which, as we talked about, comes with many logistics and staffing and costs. And also, school year calendar. We do not know if the school year calendar will be changing, if there will be an order from the state to change the school year calendar, but those would be pieces that would be funded through ESSER, and those are part of the big pieces that will essentially help us balance our budget. We'll find the balance between utilizing these other means and reducing our costs. So what's next? We will continue to narrow in on staffing costs, as staffing is the biggest portion of our budget. We've done, throughout the last meeting, the March 8th meeting, we talked through our process that we go through every year in the spring, where we align our staff with our enrollment. So as enrollment declines, our staff naturally declines as well. We will continue to watch for state budget updates, and as we talked through, 21-22 is the first year in the biennial budget, so hopefully we'll find out in summer what those state factors are. There was a few years ago when it took through, I think, September, so hopefully it comes earlier than that this year. And then we have more of our budget factors narrowed in and have actuals and less assumptions made, which means our budget is more accurate. We will talk, as we just talked through, strategically plan our current year's budget reallocation and ESSER funding, and essentially work through scenarios and how those three components will work to balance our budget. And then finally, our projected mill rate. So the mill rate is based on a formula where we have our total tax levy, our total tax levy, and we divide that by the total equalized value in the area, in our municipalities. So there are a number of reasons that mill rate would change, and two of those that go in, two of the larger ones that go into play in this scenario is that our overall revenue limit is decreasing, and then our equalized value is increasing. So by a simple math problem, our mill rate will continue to decline. And the current year our current mill rate is $8.75, and projected at this point for next year is somewhere between $8.05 and $8.21. So it is also important to note that our budget reallocation plan for this year could affect next year's mill rate, depending on if those dollars are transferred to a Fund 46 or a Fund 38, if they're earmarked within our fund balance for specific expenses and specific needs going forward. So all of these factors sort of play together, and I just wanted to point out too, where we've been in the last decade was a steady upwards of $9.50 and have been decreasing in recent years because our revenue limit continues to go down and our equalized value continues to go up. So those are some of the factors. Again, many factors going to come into play within our mill rate, but we will project again to see a decrease for our 21-22 mill rate. And with that, we are wrapping up the workshop. So any board member questions I can take?
No, but this was fantastic. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And we'll do a number of as we go through the budget cycle, and they'll focus sort of on different areas. The March one, as I mentioned a few times, was more in-depth in the actual revenue limit formula. And then in September, that's really our meat and potatoes of how we go from revenue limit all the way down to our mill rate and that equation that we go through that process. So, go ahead, Noah.
No.
I just want to say, just for some of our new board members may not be familiar with this process, but it's very common for us to have projecting a deficit at this point. It's so early in the process, as Caitlin has said, there's many things we don't know. We always conservatively budget, and so, you know, the deficits have been a lot larger in years past, so actually I have one underneath. $1.5 million at this point is actually very good in comparisons in years past, so I don't want anyone to freak out. That is very normal for us at this point, and we will often pass a budget in June, which is at deficit, because we have to, by law, pass a budget in June. But by the time we all get to our final budget in October, it's always balanced. It's always how we've done it.
I appreciate that. I was going to mention that and I forgot, so I'm really glad you brought that up, that this is normal and we should not be concerned at this point in time, and we do budget conservatively.
Any other questions before? Thank you so much, Caitlin, and your team for all your hard work. This is going to end our broadcast, and we will take a 5-minute recess, and we will resume for a closed session. All right, we're going to call this meeting back to order. I will ask for a motion and a second to convene an executive session in accordance with the Wisconsin State Statute 19.851F to consider, oh, wrong one. How about 19.851C, to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the government body has jurisdiction or exercise responsibility, specifically to discuss district leadership assignments.
So moved.
Second.